Is it just me, or does it seem like Dana White doesn't even care about the UFC anymore? Let's get into it. This is not a Dana White hate video. I actually like Dana White, but the question that I have to ask all of us is, why does it feel like he just doesn't care about his own product these days? I think this is a very fair question based on how the UFC has been moving lately, and just the way that Dana White acts in interviews, press conferences, and even his overall attitude just doesn't seem like that of someone that enjoys what they do for a living. I'm a diehard fan, man, and to see MMA Guru go on the Full Send podcast and basically lay out all the ways that Dana White could be promoting the UFC a lot better, and then the Nelk boys just sit there and glaze Dana as if he's completely wrong.
When you're on your phone and you're giving me like 240p grainy quality fight announcements, it's like, come on, man.
I mean, look at this Paramount Plus deal.
Yeah, but that's just the UFC.
I think if you knew him, you'd know how much of like strategic killer he is.
Okay, when was the last face-to-face interview with fighters then?
I don't know, man. I'm going to lay out the very clear reasons as to why I think Dana isn't as interested in the UFC anymore, and why he should possibly consider retiring. This brings me into my first theme. The UFC is on autopilot. I'm just going to keep it real, man. Since the end of COVID, during that whole Fight Island era, it genuinely feels like the UFC has been running on autopilot and is just kind of running itself at this point. The biggest thing I can point to is the fight announcements themselves. They feel extremely rushed and unprepared. Let's just look at their announcement rollouts. They always put out a tweet saying that Dana White will go live at a certain time, and then he's always a couple of hours late. Not to mention that when he does finally jump on a live stream, it's literally the lowest quality. He's sitting in like a plane, or he's sitting in this like tiny room with the worst Wi-Fi connection.
I want to oil you up. What the f does that mean?
And then you compare this to like some of the boxing promotions that put out these insane promo videos to announce fights, and I'm not even asking the UFC to do something like this. To be honest, I actually liked the way that Dana White used to announce the fights, where it was this same live stream process, but he would just have more energy, where these days he comes on looking like a zombie, like he didn't sleep last night, has zero energy, and is just there doing his 9-to-5 job. The most recent example is when he came on to announce Izzy versus Joe Pyfer. This definitely isn't a massive fight. Like, Izzy is a big name, but I don't know if it was worth them hyping up all day that this announcement was coming. But even still, when Dana White did announce it, it felt so soulless, like he was just reading off of what the transcript was, almost as if he doesn't know anything about Israel Adesanya or about Joe Pyfer. He didn't build up this fight at all. He literally just read out the announcement and that was it. With these live streams, he's reaching a massive casual audience, and in order to appeal to that casual audience, you have to basically give them a bit of the background on these fighters, but he just doesn't do that. I don't know if this is just me, but it feels like the UFC announces a lot of their cards and the big fights very close to the month that they are happening. Like I said, back in the day, they used to give it months of promo. They used to build this fight up and give it enough time for people to actually be interested. I remember, I think it was like UFC 300, they didn't announce the main event until very close. And then they did the same thing with the Sphere card. They announced the main event like literally a month out. I think that's the overarching issue with this whole concept of Dana White not caring. It's because the UFC has gotten to a point now where they are big enough that they don't have to promote their events to be successful, because they know even if it doesn't do spectacular, it's still going to turn a profit for them. So my question is, what's the incentive for Dana White these days? There are a lot of times this past year where a lot of my friends that watch UFC, they're not into it as much as I am, but they just didn't even know a UFC event was on at the weekend. And also going into 2026 with this new Paramount deal, we were under the impression that we would probably be getting less Apex cards. There's already been like 2 Apex cards announcements with no new dates announced of them going to a new city or a new country. Which brings me into my next theme, the big fights keep getting fumbled. This is the biggest tell that Dana White just isn't really interested in the UFC anymore, because back in the day, Dana White would do everything in his power, even if it meant manipulating the fighters to get them to fight each other. Dana White knows how to put the big fights together, and if he was genuinely interested, we would have got Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall, or we would have already had Islam versus Ilya. But Dana White these days, it just doesn't seem like he really cares that much, because like I said, he knows the fights are going to perform well either way. That Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones fight just got dragged out until it just dissolved, and it seemed like there was no urgency from Dana. He was hell-bent on just promoting Jon Jones as the best fighter and glazing him non-stop.
The greatest fighter to ever live is Jon Jones. Never lost a fight.
And booking Jones versus Stipe, a fight that no one wanted to watch aside from Dana himself. Whereas the smart thing would have been to, I don't know, get something in the contract that says if Jones wins this fight, he will go on to fight Tom Aspinall. And And then even when Jones did retire, it didn't feel like Dana White really cared that much. It just felt like he was annoyed at John Jones. And here, the most recent example for this is Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. This fight was supposed to happen like 2 years ago at this point. And I agree, man, this fight is past its due date, but Dana White in a very recent interview came out and said he has zero interest in booking this fight for the White House card.
I know there's like all the talk of Michael Chandler and Conor. Do you see like that as like a realistic thing?
No,
happening?
I mean, that was a couple years ago.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
not nothing you'd entertain for the
No.
White House.
No.
To be honest, like I said, it's past its due date, but if Conor McGregor is going to return at all, it doesn't make sense for him to fight anyone else aside from Michael Chandler. Is that just me? Like, you can't throw Conor in with someone who's at their prime right now, so you can't give him top level competition, but you also don't want to give him a complete nobody because it's Conor McGregor. So Michael Chandler is that perfect middle ground where he's definitely not in his prime, but he's also not a nobody. He's a big name. So this really shocked me when Dana White came out and said that he had no interest in doing this. Like, what has the past 2 years been about? Not to mention, Dana White is just extremely hypocritical. Like, he'll literally say one thing and then just completely contradict it in the next interview. Like, he was non-stop alluding that Conor McGregor would be on this White House card, but then all of a sudden just completely flips and shows zero interest in it, like it was just an afterthought. And this pattern just keeps on repeating, where Dana White will just adjust his statements to suit him that week. And it's really annoying, man. Like, I get it, maybe he just doesn't want to announce fights, he doesn't want to give out any leaks, but like, why? The worst that's going to happen is people will know a fight is in the works, but isn't that what you would want if you're running a promotion, to have some hype behind it? Which brings me into my next theme, the Dana White interview problem. Let's just call it how it is, man. Dana White very rarely gives a straight answer anymore. If you watch any of his old interviews, like back in 2016, 2015, that 2010 era, he would always be on interviews answering the tough questions, you know, giving the media members their time. He wouldn't just do podcasts or, you know, these big brand interviews. He would do interviews with genuine media members that actually care about the sport, because these days he just does the mainstream outlets, and we all know they aren't going to ask any hard questions. They're casual fans, if casual fans at all. But the moment he does get a tough question, like the recent Complex interview he did, he just beats around the bush and goes in circles and just avoids answering the question entirely. Not to mention, Dana White's biggest tactic when it comes to media and interviews is he will just interrupt the host and talk over them, talk louder than them, to just intimidate them and control the interview. And let's just be real, man. Reporters often avoid asking Dana tough questions because they know their job and reputation is in his hands. They could literally lose their media access, which gives them their job. Not to mention, is it really worth it if Dana White himself isn't going to actually answer the tough question? This just creates a media bubble with zero accountability. Like, if Dana answers something that contradicts something else he said, no one will push back on that. That's why I truly believe that the UFC kind of fell off in terms of media when Ariel Helwani got banned from the company. He was the only guy that would genuinely ask tough questions and that would actually push back on answers.
You're going to take care of Yoel Romero. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate? What does that mean?
That's between me and Yoel Romero.
Well, there is.
Thanks for asking. That's between us.
No, I know, but there is the precedent with Carlos Condit and GSP where.
Is there? There's really not a precedent. There's different scenarios and different situations.
Another great example of this is recently when Dana White got asked about Kobe Covington's spot in the rankings and how Jeff Neal is somehow below him. Dana White's response was so funny, man. It was like he genuinely did not know who Jeff Neal even was.
In the latest rankings update, Colby Covington was moved down just one slot in the welterweight rankings. How does a guy like that stay in the top 15 for years after not fighting?
It's a great point.
Do you have those conversations about the rankings where it's
Great point.
why is this guy, like Jeff Neal was moved one spot above him? Strange, no?
Yes.
He just said, yeah, like one-word answers, and that was it. Even though it was a direct question, he just completely avoided it. And the reporter, again, no pushback. It just shows Dana White is very clearly unfamiliar with the product. I wouldn't even overlook the idea that he probably didn't even know any of this. Because let's be real, man, he doesn't seem like a guy that is deeply plugged into the roster and how everything is playing out. Which brings me into my next theme, his focus. Let's just look at the facts, man. Dana White's focus these days is everywhere else except for the UFC. I truly believe he's just spreading himself way too thin, so it's completely understandable why the UFC product is starting to suffer. But my big question with that is, why is he even doing this? The UFC just signed its biggest deal ever, $7 billion to Paramount. The sport is global and the roster is arguably the deepest it's ever been. So if this isn't the moment for Dana to go all in on the UFC, when is? Let's just look at his current focus, right? Right now he's a board member of Meta. He's also just started a boxing promotion. He's still running Power Slap. cap. He recently said he's making 2 documentaries, one about gambling, and he's got multiple side ventures everywhere. So like I said, it makes sense why the UFC is suffering. And if I'm being honest, it just feels like the UFC is one of Dana White's side projects, not his main focus anymore. Which brings me into my next theme, the promotion is getting lazier. Listen man, fighters these days barely get promoted, and I think there is a very deep reason as to why this happens, and it's very intentional by Dana White. Like look, when Izzy versus Joe Pyfer got announced, they both posted their own promo videos to promote this fight. The UFC didn't go out of their way to create a nice video showcasing their highlights, their skills. It was literally Dana White breathing down his phone. There's no new faces of the company like we used to have, like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, John Jones, and I think this is completely by the UFC's design. The UFC doesn't want another Conor McGregor or another John Jones or one of these big superstars that is the face of the company. Because look at it like this man, when they have big stars, this creates a lot of leverage for the fighters. They can negotiate a much higher rate. They can also be more picky as to who they choose to fight and also whether they even have to fight at all. So I truly believe the UFC goes out of their way to avoid promoting these fighters to the point of superstardom, because like I said, it gives the fighters a sense of control, and if we know one thing about Dana White, he hates when the fighters have control. That's why we see very minimal storytelling with these big fights and the same old recycled promo packages, because they'd rather have 10 replaceable names than one global superstar that has leverage over them. Which brings me into my next theme, the matchmaking problem. One of the biggest issues the UFC is currently facing is their matchmaking. It has just been absolutely horrible as of late and just very sloppy. Most of the times these days, the matchmaking makes absolutely no sense. Like let's just look at the first main event of this year. We've got Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje for an interim lightweight title. Now this literally makes no sense when you've got someone like Arman Tsarukyan, the very clear #1 contender, and he's just not even involved in this title picture whatsoever. If Justin Gaethje wins this fight, you've basically given the title to a guy that threatened to retire if he didn't get what he asked for. And then if Paddy Pimblett wins, you've got a guy that is holding the title that literally has the shallowest record of any title contender. And then we've got Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez to the following week. And let's just be real, man, this might be one of the most confusing matchups. Volk just beat Diego Lopez last year, so the fact he's getting a title shot over guys like Movsar and Leron Murphy makes no sense, man. Not to mention, these days the matchmaking feels extremely personal. Like if Dana White doesn't like someone like Arman Tsarukyan, for example, and I get it, I understand why Dana doesn't like Arman, but in a business like this where it should be merit-based and fighters are literally putting their lives on the line, your own pettiness shouldn't be a factor. You have to put emotions aside and do what's right, man. It's very clear that Dana White is just freezing Arman out. They very clearly knew that Topuria would have to take time off, and that's why they booked this interim title fight literally like a month and a half after Arman was fighting Dan Hooker, because now the UFC has an excuse as to why Arman isn't involved in this. And I get it, all those other factors of Arman punching a fan and doing all of those things outside of the octagon, they do play a factor, but let's just be real, man. Regardless of all those things, Dana White just doesn't like Arman. And we've seen this not with just Arman, it's a pattern of Dana. Like he'll avoid giving fighters a title shot even if they deserve it, just because he doesn't like them personally or doesn't like their fighting style. Marab is a great example of this, Bilal is another example. I would much rather Dana White just be honest and say he hates Arman and that's why he's not getting a title shot than to lead us all on and just give out these bogus excuses. Which brings me into my next theme, the burnout. I get it, man. Dana White has been doing this for decades at this point. He took a sport that was completely unknown to the wider community and made it into what it is today. He's had so many controversies over the years that I can understand this feeling he's probably just burnt out. But you look at someone like Eddie Hearn, man. He's been doing boxing for decades but is still extremely passionate and puts all his effort into the sport. Still sells fights like they actually matter and over delivers in the promotion for them, so why can't we expect the same from Dana? Especially with, like I said, they just signed their biggest deal, man. The sport's arguably the biggest it's ever been. It just doesn't feel like Dana White is hungry anymore, and as sad as I would be to see Dana White go, I do think it's something he should consider if he's just not going to put much effort into it anymore. I'm not just saying straight up retire, but maybe consider sharing the role with someone else that is kind of that younger, hungrier version of you. The reason I'm even making this video is because I'm a diehard fan of the sport, man. I love the UFC and I post videos on the UFC every single week because I actually care about the sport. So to see them putting out a product that is getting lazier and lazier by the year, knowing damn well that they could be putting in so much more effort and making these fights so much more bigger than they are, it just hurts to see, man. Because like I said, man, the UFC doesn't need to try hard to survive or to sell tickets. They're successful either way. Even if they did no promotion, they would still will sell tickets, but that doesn't excuse them to not go out of their way to actually make the fans interested in these fights. But yeah, man, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you guys do drop a like in this video. Make sure to subscribe as well, man. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.